Welcome everyone to the Educating Educators panel. My name is Kathleen James-Cavan. I have a long well, I won't say illustrious, but I have a long career in education myself. I just retired from 30 years teaching at the University of Saskatchewan. Before that, I taught in elementary and high schools for 10 years. And so I have a lot of interest in what is going to happen here today. And I want to introduce to you the panel and the topic. So first of all, the topic. We're going to spend an hour reflecting on questions related to the education system and where it intersects with those who have disabilities. Typically, we think of the word inclusion and how we can accommodate students with differences. We may question that idea, think about that idea. We'll get an update on what's working for students and what's not working. But we'll also address the absence of teachers with disabilities. We'll talk about access to accommodations for disabilities in our institutions of higher learning and whether accommodations is the right word. And we'll also ask about the invisibility of people and experience of people with disabilities and their experience in our school materials and images. So our panelists, I'm going to start with Mariah. Mariah is Grosvenor Park United Church's disability consultant and has helped organize connecting communities, ensuring that the disability community is properly represented. Some of you met her this morning, but I'm going to repeat the introduction because some are new to our conference this afternoon. She's passionate about making sure that people with disabilities are able to get a quality education and is receiving her bachelor's degree in education and planning on getting a special education certificate in the future. She has a background in disability advocacy and consulting through her writing and has given speeches and talks on making education more accessible. The most notable speech was given in Parliament in 2017 as part of the Daughters of the Vote program. Mariah was thrilled to be able to work on the conference and hopes that it will make a positive impact on the community. To Mariah's left, your right, is Will Rogers. Will is on the autism spectrum. He lives independently and has done so since 1992. He works part-time as an educational assistant in a local elementary school, and he also delivers flyers for the Saskatoon Star Phoenix. He has faced challenges throughout his life, including difficulties with communicating and fitting in. This has hindered his ability to work in most jobs, as well as to meet the expectations for successfully completing college courses. He has many obsessions not common in neurotypical people, such as travel guides and itineraries, as well as a number of talents, such as his ability to proofread manuscripts. Could use your help, Will. Yes. In addition, he has taken several overseas trips by himself. Beside Will is Brenna. Bev has a PhD from the University of Alberta. We met her last night. She read a wonderful piece from some of her writing. Her research has focused on and focuses on Canadian novels representing and presenting characters with disabilities written for youth. Her scholarly publication, Stories for Every Classroom, Canadian Fiction Portraying Characters with Disabilities, published by Canadian Scholar Press in 2015, was developed as a guide for educators, and she has published many articles relating to Dressang's 1999 concept of radical change in children's literature, how books for young people are evolving in relation to the digital age. Her recent academic book, Contemporary Canadian Picture Books, published by Free Open Press, Brill, in 2021, was developed from data collected during a 3-year study of picture books published in Canada, noting trends in diversity content alongside an absence of picture books about characters with disabilities. And beside Bev is Randi Barker. Randi Barker is currently on faculty at the College of Education in the Department of Educational Psychology and Special Education. She has a 40-year career in the special education field and was happy to teach in both elementary and secondary settings. After completing her MEd, Master of Education, she worked as the coordinator for special education in Saskatoon Public Schools until 2017. She has been teaching at the College of Education since 2007 and works very hard to challenge pre-service teachers to consider how best to include children with special needs in our regular classrooms. Randi is passionate about supporting students with disabilities to best meet their diverse educational needs and to prepare them for the transition to adult life. Thank you all for coming. And I would invite you now to speak for about, I think we've agreed 5 minutes or so each. Do you have a particular order you would prefer? No? Okay. Shall we move this way along instead of going this, whichever you wish. You want to begin, sure, Randi? Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I'm just trying to get right with the mic. Is this good, Brenda? Okay, good. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for the invitation to be here today. I have had the privilege of working with both Bev and Mariah. Bev for many, many years, both in Saskatoon Public and at the university, and then Mariah was in my class this fall. So I'm really, really happy to be here with both of them. Will, I'm just meeting for the first time today, and same with Kathleen. I wanted to talk to you a little bit, and I hope I'm not taking one of your topics, but about access and equity services. Are you speaking on that?
No.
Okay, good. I won't overlap. I wanted to share a little bit of information about that because I'm not sure everybody is aware of the effort that the university puts in providing accommodations and supports to students who identify as having some sort of learning need. Right now, there are over 2,800 students on campus who are taking advantage of the access and equity services. And they have based that primarily on human rights legislation and also the duty to accommodate policies. So I've been actually quite impressed with this as an instructor, lecturer, and being on faculty, is this commitment to supporting students that have diverse learning needs there. And I think the emphasis is really to have them be successful in their academic goals without discrimination or any kind of harassment regarding that. It doesn't mean that because they get accommodations that they don't need to meet the criteria and the essential skills and the academic requirements for their coursework, but it does help them be successful by providing some accommodations that meet their needs. So students need to self-identify with the access and equity services, and then they determine together which supports are required, and then a letter is sent to the instructor with these supports. And the instructor is then aware of the students that require the supports and the accommodations that they can provide. I think it's probably important to know that they provide note-taking services. This is done by other students in the class. So if students have difficulty somehow with taking notes in the class, or if they want to spend their time focusing on the instructor, they can get those notes. Some students get alternate format textbooks. The biggest one that I've had is a request for additional time, sometimes for assignments or for writing exams, so that they might need a time and a half or something, extended time to complete assignments. Some students might need to be away from school for some of the time because of appointments or not being well. Some students request that we record the lectures or that they can record the lectures. quite a few students receive assistive technology. Bev and I have another friend who has done a great deal of work with students that are on the autism spectrum, and she's working right now as an academic strategist with several students with autism and helping them meet their goals in their studies. And then there's an exam program where they can write it in a private room with a private invigilator and also get extra time there. So I thought that was important that you are aware of those accommodations provided for university students. Another area that I wanted to share with you today is around a course that I've been teaching now for a number of years. It's called Exceptional Learners, and it's a required course for all students that are in the College of Education. And this course introduces different areas of exceptionality to the teacher candidates and ensures that they know the different strategies and supports that might be provided to those students, but also that they're aware of where to get help. Because we don't expect all our teacher candidates to go into a classroom and know everything about all the different types of diversity that they'll encounter in the class. We want them to have an awareness of that, and then also where they can go to get help. So there are many specialists that are in the school system, and usually they go to what we call in the public system is the resource teacher, but they call it learning assistance teacher in the Catholic system, and in rural areas some of them are called CERTs or special education resource teachers, but they're a good resource. But also there's school psychologists, speech and language pathologists, occupational therapists, physical therapists, and of course our educational assistants that are very important. And then finally, I can't give you any specific data on this. I can only share my personal experiences, is that there are many teachers and staff in our schools that do have exceptionalities, and you might not be aware of that, and I know it's one of the things that you want to talk about today, but I have worked with teachers, EAs, and admin assistants who have had visual impairments. I've worked with people that have had learning disabilities, that have had ADHD, that have been on the autism spectrum. We've had EAs with hearing impairments. And so I just want you to know that they are in our system. They're not always visible. I mean, everybody probably knows Colette Bergeron, who we have a school named after, who's, you know, a wonderful example of a person with a physical disability that is a teacher and has made a difference in the lives of our students. But I did want you to know that that is the case in Saskatoon Public, and I know in the Catholic system as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Randi. Bev.
Oh, well, it's great being here with you this afternoon. I also know Mariah as an instructor. I think it was last year I had the privilege of working with Mariah. I know Will a little bit socially from interacting in the community with Will and his family. I know Randi because she was my boss for a number of years, and so I really have to be careful what I say here, that she's wonderful. And I know Kathleen is a colleague from the University of Saskatchewan, so it's a great chance for me to be with good people here and visit with you. I'm really enjoying this conference and the opportunity to listen and to learn. Essentially, I think this conference is about change. What's working, what's not, and ideas for a good path forward. As I thought about what I could contribute to this particular panel, my first thought was that I don't really know anything. The older I get, the less I know that I know. But my second thought was that I'm curious and interested in thinking more about inclusion, both from my past as a classroom teacher and a special education teacher, and from my recent experiences as a faculty member before I retired. I also really love talking about systems and the way we do things. So as we think about change, I think it can happen on an individual level, a personal level, someone's story, and a small group. I think change can also happen in the big picture with a big system, organizational change. I can see in terms of both schools and universities, a couple of similarities. I see universal design for learning happening at both schools and universities to some extent. So people trying to do things that work for everyone. And I also see unique accommodations for individuals at both the school level and the university level. Again, maybe not working for everyone, but as a system, I see that interacting. I think, though, there's a significant difference between university and schools related to accommodations. And I think it has to do, in one case, with essential skills or competencies. I think Randi mentioned this briefly at the university level. So while kids in schools can receive accommodations in the form of adaptations or modifications or alternate curriculum, kids at universities, students at universities, adults at universities receive accommodations in the form of adaptations, but not modifications or alternate that would change the goals or the content. And I think the reason for that is to do with the essential skills or the competencies that are applied at the university level. So I think if we're looking to change university systems, one direction might be to look at those lists of essential skills, to look at those lists of competencies to see if they're fair, if they make sense. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. So I know that professional colleges such as physiotherapy, the College of Education, I'm guessing law, possibly medicine, have lists of essential skills on their websites for teacher candidates, for example. And so it might be very interesting to do some research and look at those just to see, have they been updated, are they current, is change needed there? I know that ideas about skills and abilities needed for certain professions do change over time. In 1934, when my dad became a teacher, one competency was legible handwriting. And I'm really lucky that that changed for me when I went through. So I can see 4 other things supporting inclusion as a practice at both the school level and the university level. And these 4 things are knowledge, philosophy, time, and creativity. So I see knowledge on the part of educators in schools and to some extent universities about inclusion happening. Maybe not to the extent we'd like, but I see it visible. I see philosophy in schools and at universities related to inclusion happening, good philosophy. We want to work with people, we want to do right. Again, maybe not to the extent we would hope, but I do see it present. Where time and creativity come in, though, I think there's gaps. I see both time and creativity applied in schools better than I see them applied at universities. So in schools, if I have a class where there are lots of accommodations, and as a teacher, I have a lot of different thinking around that, I often get more support. I might get teacher associates working with me as a team. I might get a smaller class size. I might have certain students shift in and out of my class in favor of other classes. So I think there's more flexibility at the school's level around time than at universities. When I was a faculty member, the formula was 40, 40, 20, so 40% teaching, 40% research, 20% committee work, community work. And that's not flexible. If I have a heavy teaching year, my time is still expected to fit into that 40% schedule. I can't take more time for my teaching and let my research go if I want tenure, if I want to be kept, if I want to be promoted, and those sorts of things. So I think there's room for more considerations of instructor time and flexibility around that at universities. Creativity. I think creativity is connected to time, but also to ability. Creative thinking essentially Brainstorming as a solutions-oriented activity around adaptations takes both time and skill. I equate creative thinking with an "in what ways might we" kind of approach. And that was the part about teaching I loved. I loved working with individual children in schools, thinking about in what ways might we help this work well. And I wondered, can this kind of creativity needed to create inclusionary solutions be supported somehow more at universities? Can it be taught to instructors? Should we be teaching more creative thinking in schools just as a general way to have children come into the world of work, including university work and more aspects of community life, better equipped to do the kind of creative problem solving that positively impacts supports for diversity? So in summary, I think there's some places at a systems level in higher education that warrant future research, looking at the essential skills lists of particular colleges, looking at time for inclusion, and looking at creative thinking skills as possibly another support. So I'm excited for this afternoon and looking forward to all the questions and what others have to say. Thanks.
Thank you, Bev. Will, would you like to speak for about 5 minutes or so, or
Sure.
however you wish?
Yeah, one thing that's affected me the most is I have difficult communication skills, like especially with explaining things. Like if I have to define something, like if somebody driving a car stops by and asks me directions, I have great difficulty explaining the directions. I could easily show them on the map where someplace is, but they never have a map with them. and this has affected me in job interviews, because especially with the way they do job interviews these days, they ask you scenario questions like like tell them about a certain incident, or what would I do in a certain case, and not all of those questions apply to me. And I didn't learn about job interviews that way when I was in high school. And they require, and I think interviewers want on the spot thinking, like, and I can't do that. And I've tried to work as a letter carrier a few times, but I wasn't able to pass the interviews, and I think probably being a letter carrier wouldn't be a good fit for me. I work best when I'm working on my own. That's why I do well working as a flyer carrier. But I work as an educational assistant for 2 days a week, and I connect very well with children. I would never harm them in any way, and in fact, I like to protect children from adults who are capable of physical or sexual abuse. But I connect well with children because I'm able to relate to them at their level, and you don't need certain social etiquette with children that you need with adults. And apparently it's common for people with autism to connect with children for that reason. And it's also the same with autistic teenagers connecting with kids who are younger than they are. When I was a teenager, I connected well with kids who were younger than me. And I even had a friend who was 4 years younger than me, because I was about as mature as his age group. But I did not connect well with kids who were older than me. I also have a great difficulty recognizing faces, even though I remember names. Like I didn't even recognize Kathleen when I saw her a few minutes ago, but I used to know. But I knew her son about 25 years ago, once during once at the church when kids were making Christmas decorations, Kathleen's son was in that group with 3 other kids, and I talked to them about my autism, and they were really fascinated. One of the things I told them was my ability to remember every color from a large set of crayons when I was 5 years old. And those kids were really fascinated by it, and they all told their parents about it. And I think those kids were still talking about it 5 years later.
Yep.
And I often tend to mix up faces that look similar, and I often don't recognize people who I know if they have like a change in hairdo. Mm-hmm. And it's also very hard for me to learn at the same pace as other people, so I don't learn well in mainstreamed environments. But I also have many obsessions like travel guides and travel itineraries and monthly temperatures. So that's pretty much all I have to say for now. But I'm going to be here for a while longer if you have any questions for me, if you'd like to share something with me. Okay.
Thank you so much, Will. I do have some questions, but I'm going to ask Mariah to speak next, and we'll have a conversation a bit more later, too.
Hi, everyone. Well, Kathleen's talked a little bit about my background, but I'll tell you a little bit more as well. I was born with a high spinal cord injury, which means that I have a physical disability as well as some medical problems. And getting through elementary school, public school, for me was, I'm not sure if I'd say flat out difficult, but it was more difficult than it would have been for my peers who didn't have the same issues, just for a range of reasons that I can't guarantee whether or not they would happen in the school system now. But this is just kind of my story, where I think it was a combination of issues. I think where my medical problems and I was absent from school a lot, and I think that influenced many of my teachers to think that I had more an intellectual disability as well, and that just wasn't the case. And so as I kind of grew up and was going through school, I realized that this happened to a lot of my friends. We had physical disabilities, but the school would assume we had other issues. And when I realized that if I could go through and become a teacher, I could change that. And so one thing I like to talk about is that you shouldn't assume that a student will need modifications, will need their curriculum changed. Start with adaptations and work your way back. The interesting thing is that in my experience, the university is actually better at that than public school, at least in my experience. I got to university, I realized that a lot of the things I needed were just kind of included through AES, like Randi said. I needed very basic things. And once I had that, things got a lot easier. And so I think about that quite a bit, about how a lot of these, we don't think about that. Our instinct is to modify instead of adapt. And I'd like that to go the other way. Our instinct would be to adapt and then modify. And after I got through my first degree, my B.Ed is actually my second attempt. once I got through my degree in history, I actually worked as an EA like Will. We work in different school systems.
Yeah, yeah.
So I work in the public system, and Will work in the Catholic system. So, but as I was going through as an EA, one thing I realized was that a lot of the kids were, I'm not sure if I'd say they were shocked to see me, but it was, this happened a couple of times where I kind of felt like their understanding of the world shifted in an interesting way. Like, oh, there are grown-ups like me too. Which I think was quite which I actually quite enjoyed that a little bit. I was like, oh, I'm kind of making a weird difference just by existing in the space, just by walking in the building. So I always thought that was quite interesting. But I do see that I noticed this still, that there is trouble. Kids have trouble getting through the school system because of their disability, and that's kind of one of the reasons I want to go into teaching, is I want to make it easier, or as easy as possible, for kids to get through, and they won't get stopped because of their disability. Thanks.
Thank you, Mariah. And I have some questions now for all of you. And the first one has two parts to it in a way. It's about the pandemic. And the question is, how has the pandemic at the beginning and now affected students with disabilities? And the reason I say it might have two parts is there's positive and negative effects. So would anybody care to, anybody thought about that or had experience with that?
I can maybe speak to it. Some of my comments here are coming from my students, because I've asked them what are they seeing out in the schools, and I'm sure that it affects everybody differently, and some students might really thrive in the the at-home learning, online learning, but I would say that the majority of our students have really struggled with that isolation. And I would say that there's a lot more issues around mental health, especially anxiety in our students, and I'm personally very concerned for them. I think that we need to surround them with a lot of supports and love and hope, because I do think my own feeling is that it's been very tough on them. And that's not even talking about some of the fear they might have had just plain coping with the idea of this deadly pandemic, that maybe they lost grandparents or other loved ones, and we don't even, I don't even know how many are affected like that. But I do think that the isolation has been pretty tough, and my students have indicated that that's what they're seeing. Mm-hmm. Another one too, just going to mention, because it's sort of related but not really, is the wearing of the masks in schools. And I think a lot of children have really missed that facial expressions and contact, and the smiles and the things that they were used to getting from their teachers and their peers. And so I don't know that everybody always thinks about that. I have a little granddaughter who was taking dance, and she was so excited about it, and then they all had to wear masks at their dance lessons, and she didn't want to do it anymore, and I think it was because she was missing that social interaction with her peers and with her instructors. So I think we have to kind of be aware of that as well.
Any other thoughts?
I have one thing that, this is coming more from a student perspective and kind of my general understanding of the world, is that I think because of the pandemic, are a little bit more understanding of just needing more flexibility in terms of around health or whatever reason why, like if a student can't come to class for whatever reason, because I got sick. I promise I'm not about to cry. I'm not quite sure what's wrong with my voice. But when, like, I was often ill, I'm still regularly very, very sick, and I have to miss a lot of classes because of that. And before the pandemic, it used to cause all this havoc on just the way, just on my life and everything else. It's like, really, you're sick again? You have to, why? But now it's like, okay, please go home. Like, just stop. And people are more understanding around this in terms of flexibility. And one thing I did hear was during the height of during pandemic, when the schools were really shut down, was like students who were homesick because for extended periods of time and had to use a service called like hospital homebound schooling, where a teacher would actually come into the student's home if they were stayed home sick for a long time. They didn't have to have that person come in. They could actually keep up with their peers because everything had shifted to online learning, and they could do it from home at the same as their classmates, which I did think was interesting, where they didn't have this separation of the student who was homesick for whatever reason actually learning the same content from somebody else than the rest of their students, because this was something that happened to me. Was I was learning math from like 5 different people, and it just caused chaos because I could not good at math anyway. And so it's like, so I'd have my regular teachers, and I'd have like one or two in some cases, like different hospital homebound teachers helping me, and then my dad, and then my brother, and then somebody else. And so it's just causing absolute chaos in my life. But I think that now I think at the time there when everything was online, I kind of wonder if it made it a little bit easier for the students who did have those medical problems and were maybe isolated anyway. I wonder if it made it easier for them to just kind of maybe just cope with schoolwork. That's just my thought.
Thank you. I think as an instructor myself during that time, one of the things I appreciated was that we were all waist high in the world. And I was teaching students for 2 or 3 classes, and they had no idea I wore leg braces. So it was kind of interesting, a different experience. I don't know if they, if they saw me in real life later, if they made a connection or not. But anyway, just an interesting experience, I think, for me. But the isolation is certainly something that students at universities and elementary and high schools, I think they all have spoken about that. Yeah. I want to turn our attention to slightly a different topic, and that's about the future, about new schools. How are new schools, and I'm curious about this because I don't know anything about this, but how are new schools being planned or created with people with disabilities in mind? And if not, if you don't know examples, are there innovations that you would like to see, changes you'd like to see? And I think we're here thinking about the physical environment, but maybe there's another aspect too we might bring into it. So, changes,
I
Mariah.
have an answer. So when I was working as a EA, the first time I went into one of these brand new schools, they are sometimes referred to as P3 schools. There's these brand new buildings. There's a public school on one side and a Catholic school on the other. And they were built in, I don't know exactly when they were opened. I want to say 2015 or 16.
Yeah, actually 17.
2017. Oh, they're brand new. And when I went there for the first time, I was amazed. Like the hallways are wide. There's automatic buttons on. I think I found an automatic button on the staff room. I was so happy. I had never seen anything like that. And there was like accessible staff washrooms, and everything was wide enough to get like a mobility through. I really enjoyed it. And the elevators, one thing that I've noticed is that in some older schools, that if they're if there's 2 stories, the elevator it's locked. You need a special key to get in, to like use it, and it's an entire event to just get the elevator to turn on. And in these schools, it's a regular elevator, and it made me so happy, which is a very weird thing, but just a basic thing. So I think they're great.
I was very fortunate I was a coordinator at the time where they were doing the planning for those P3 schools, and they asked me to kind of give the special ed perspective on it. And accessibility was really top of mind for actually everybody. We were all, very aware that many of our schools are not accessible, and so like the doors with all the buttons to push, so you don't need to worry. The one thing I will confess that I wasn't able to get, even though I kind of pushed for it, is when you talk about the universal design, you're thinking about ramps and ways to get up stairs that, are a little more accessible for people in wheelchairs, but not just them. It could be for moms or dads with strollers and babies and things like that, or teachers with carts. Lots of reasons why you might want that. They would put in the elevators, but there was it seemed to be impossible to put in ramps in the buildings because of the space that was required, and the Ministry of Education has all these rules around how much space you have and square feet, and so they weren't able to do the ramps. But I thought if you could have designed those new builds so that when they went up to the second floor they had a really nice circular ramp to go up there, that would have been so awesome. But that wasn't something I was able to do, but I did think about it. And I did try, so there you go.
Well, thank you for trying.
Yeah.
Yes, Brett.
So I like to think, just kind of off the cuff, and I'm prompted to think about a school in Regina. I think it was Sacred Heart School, perhaps a decade ago, that did some creative problem solving around combined classes. So they had grade 8 students that weren't attending well, and they had grade 1 students that needed more one-on-one help with reading. So what they did was they took 2 classes and they put them grade 1, grade 8 permanently together for a year. Grade 1, grade 8 here, and grade 1, grade 8 here. And they had some really interesting positives. I think maybe older kids discovered that they were good at working with younger kids. And I think younger kids discovered that, oh, I've got a friend here who can read to me, and they're cool, and I'd like to read like that. And so I'm thinking about some of these spaces. I think classrooms haven't changed a lot in a long time. Maybe there's different ways to think about schools, and this combined age approach just struck me as something that might be supportive.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I have one more. Sorry. The other thing that we were able to implement with the new builds was a lot of different types of seating tables so that you could do alternate things with the students in the classroom, and it'd be really easy to change the setup of the classroom. So different tables, it could be moved into different configurations. We'd have standing tables so students could stand or sit at the tables. For kids with ADHD, we had these bars underneath the tables where they could move their feet. We have things called hockey stools. I'm not sure if you've seen them, but they're able to sit there and move around a little bit while they're in class. So we're able to do a lot of alternate type of furniture. So that was kind of fun.
Oh, that's interesting. So, Will, I have a question for you. You mentioned that neurodiverse people with autism, work really well with young people. You found that. So I'm wondering if there are other people that you know of working with students or children in the school system who also are neurodiverse, like you, or similar.
Not in the school system here, but I do have an autistic friend in Illinois and this started out as an adult-child friendship I had on the internet, but now he was 9 when I first started communicating with him, and I was in my late 20s, and now he's in his 30s, and he connects very well with children. His name is James, and this has often been in conflict with some people who don't have good feelings about men, especially bonding with kids. And he volunteered at a summer camp for kids with autism for several years, and then he got approached by people in charge who told him it was against professional rules for counselors and volunteers to connect with the kids, and James also once volunteered in a daycare when he was a teenager, and he connected very well with the kids. But then one parent complained, and then he got banned from volunteering at the daycare.
Do you think there should be more opportunities, though, so there's not so much focus on one person doing that, if there were more people?
I think there should be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And like I really wish, and up until about 30 years ago, and church was a very good way to connect with kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I would really like Sunday school programs. I would really like it to be like them to be family-oriented environments, just like in a classic Sesame Street sketch.
Yeah.
Or a classic Sesame Street episode.
Yes.
I want it to be just like that.
Yes, good point. I like that idea.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to throw out questions to the audience. Does anyone, I have more questions, but I don't want to take all the time of our experts here.
Ellen, we'll just check in and see if there are any burning questions before we go on with the questions that Kathleen has.
Thank you so much for coming. It was a really interesting discussion. I have a question regarding EA at the school board. So my boy have autism, who is 10 years old. So I'm concerned of his constipation, and when you go to the washroom, the pee color. So I have a 1-1 EA at the school, going to King George Community School. So if there is a possibility so that we can get a male EA so that he can, go to the washroom and check those patterns on a regular basis, because my boy go to school from 9:30 to 3:30, so he need to go to the washroom. And how can I request a male EA for my boy who have intensive special needs? Thank you.
Does anyone have a thought on that?
I know that it's a reasonable request to make. I don't know if it's always possible to provide a male EA. I think if it could be honored, it would. I think the majority of our EAs are women, so I really can't speak to it. I've been gone for a while, but I know it would be okay to request. I don't think that you could say for sure it be provided. And maybe Mariah, you, from your experience with that, would you say?
I have no idea, and
Yeah.
especially if you have a situation where like the regular EA is out sick, and then you have to call in a substitute, and then you kind of just get whoever walks in the door. And I've been in that situation where I had a student who needed help in the washroom, and he was, I think, 3, and it was me. That was my job. So I had to, and it is.
It's definitely the EA's role to provide that personal care. I think the best way maybe to think of it would be like having a male nurse or a female nurse, and you really can't ask for one or the other when you're in the hospital, that you get who you get. And so that's how I would kind of think you might need to think about it. It's not that they wouldn't want to honor a request like that, it just might be impossible for scheduling, staffing, all the other reasons. And if it makes your boy more comfortable, I think it's something that's fair to ask. But
It might be that we need more men who become EAs.
well,
to-
I don't disagree there. And
Yeah.
we are, I think,
Yeah.
getting more. Would you
Yeah,
say, Mariah?
we need more.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. Any others? Oh, sorry, I'll be back to you, Fran.
Hi guys, good morning, or is it the afternoon? Yeah, afternoon, yeah. I've been on the phone all morning, talking to the media lots and stuff, but how about the autism spectrum? As a foster parent, we had this child in our care that came into our house. A lot of people are starting to know what autism is all about in our communities up in the north, right? It's it's quite a few people now are starting to come out, right, with the autism spectrum. But my point is, I don't know what that place is called in Saskatoon here, Buckle, is it Buckle? Alvin Buckle Place. It takes about 2 years before a child has to be seen. Wow, you know, like this is, this is a big, huge problem, and coming from the North's point of view, right? So of course, you know, all my connections, you know. So I had to talk to the minister that is responsible for all these programs or whatever it is, and a lot of people don't realize how hard it is, especially with other community members, families that don't know how to speak for themselves because of barriers of Cree speaking or Dene speaking in our communities. So it's really hard somebody needs to be there to coach them through this. And now we don't have a program like that, I'm assuming in our province, but this is what I face. So they call me, it's like, well, I'm not really a God's person, but you know, I'll try my best to represent that issue. So with that Buckle place, I phoned the Premier's office, and then, because I got to know the Premier pretty well, so, you know, right away that child was seen. Okay, lucky he was a First Nation child, right? But a lot of Métis children don't have that kind of luxury to be seen by specialists in this perspective, because a lot of children and the Métis citizens, they're not like the First Nation, because they get everything is covered for them, like with health, you know, and stuff like that, dental appointments. But with the Métis citizens, it's really hard.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you.
And we have one from Fran.
My question or comment is kind of in line with what Mr. Tinker said. FASD, I find when I'm trying to have discussions with educators, they are not educated in that genre at all. Same with a lot of social workers. And like Gary said, kids are having a really, really hard time getting assessed. And that's if they have an advocate. I just hop on a broom and go, and they listen to me because they're afraid of my broom. But like Gary said, there's so many children that aren't seen and don't have people to advocate for them. This is a big problem in our province. It's a big problem in our country, and it needs to be addressed, especially around education. And I am, quite frankly, kind of disgusted with the education system here because they don't address the FASD.
Comments from the panel in response?
So you're talking about a couple things here. The first one is around the diagnosis of FASD, and then whether or not they meet the criteria for special education funding with the Ministry of Education. And the good news there is that when I first started working in the field, the only students that would actually get the funding for FASD would be those that had the full-blown diagnosis of fetal alcohol syndrome. But now that they've made it into a spectrum disorder, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, we are able to provide supports for the students on the spectrum, even if you don't have things like the maternal declaration of consuming alcohol during pregnancy. So to get the supports for those students is much, much better now. So I'm not able to speak to all school divisions and all schools and all teachers, but I do know that they do qualify for special education funding, and that you know, it's unfortunate if they're not getting the supports and services they need. To me, that's unacceptable, but it's sometimes reality of you know, having all the teachers trained and understanding the needs of that specific group. The FASD network here in Saskatoon do a marvelous job of professional development with our teachers, and we've had them in working with our special education teachers, our resource teachers, so that they can learn some strategies and supports that help that particular group of students. But I know that we're not anywhere near everything that we could be for all our students. But I do know that the funding is there and that the professional development is there, and whether it extends to all our needs, and I obviously can't promise that.
We have a follow-up question.
Yeah, can I give them her a follow-up, and then I'll come back to you? Okay.
I'm not trying to bogart. My other comment or question, maybe you can help me with too, is because my children are First Nations. In order to get an EA for them, they have to have a treaty number through Jordan's principle. Now, if they're not registered with their band, they're out of luck. They don't get an EA. There's no funding for them, is what I'm told. So how do I get a treaty number for a child when I know what their mother's numbers are? Or how do I get the birth mother's number so these kids can get an EA?
Is that in the city schools?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I've never heard that we needed a treaty number to support the students, so I can't answer that one. I've never heard that before.
Nor have I.
Yeah, I'm really sorry that's the case. I don't have an answer for you. I don't know.
So I'm an educator as well, and I've been in various school systems. A lot of them have been First Nations based. There are definite issues, FASD, autism, but what needs to also be addressed at that training, some of those symptoms are actually trauma, and they present as trauma. So our classrooms need to be trauma informed, but it comes down to me as an educator making a choice that I want to be able to learn. I can't possibly know everything about the autism spectrum. I will do my best. But trauma-informed classrooms, I think, are critical. That training, it is a double-edged sword, because it's just like taking Indigenous studies in university, making it mandatory. You're going to get people that do not want to be there. And it's hard. You can't force that issue. Where are they on their journey? But trauma-informed classrooms, I think, is a critical step that we need to be doing. There's misdiagnoses all the time. What's presenting as ADHD is actually, in fact, trauma.
Thank you for that, Tracy.
Interesting point. We're going to go to Gary, and then we're getting close to wrapping up. So just very brief there, Gary.
So anyway, in regards to that issue that you guys are talking about, the First Nation people, because we live with First Nations, probably about 80%. It's Métis and First Nations as well. But if I became a treaty right now, I am not recognized as a treaty because I don't live in a reserve. That's a big problem. But the government recognizes your number, but the band doesn't recognize your number, even though you're from that band. See, that's what we're facing today, that question that you're asking. So, for me, I can become a treaty right now in 48 hours, right? Because my grandma was a treaty. The reason why she lost her treaty rights because she sold her treaty rights because she couldn't go in a bar. So she sold them for $5. Now she became a Métis citizen. So those now our band members today, they don't recognize the new members that are treaty members today. I just want to make that clear to you guys today.
Back to you, Kathleen.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for your observations and your critique and raising issues. I think what we're seeing too is I hear the conversation, we're also facing the remnants and the continuation of colonization in questions of who gets help, who gets support, and why. This is, and you've raised some really important topics about trauma-informed teaching that is, I think, reflected in the question, or it can be reflected in the question, what needs to change? And there's something we can also hang on to, as well as changing the physical features of our teaching and informing our instructors as well about these issues. Now, before it's time to wrap up. I want to give the opportunity to the panel, though, to say if there's anything that you really must say before we leave.
I just want to thank people for being here. You know, I think the first step is coming together and sharing our stories, and I've heard some really important stories today, and I just wanted to say thank you.
And I'll echo that too. Thank you all so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for listening.